Mind the backfill, I'll work with it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin James. I am, in this role, I serve as the Director and Chief Liaison of the Mayor's Office of Film and Television Production here in the city of Los Angeles, and spend a significant part of my time in City Hall. I also serve as the President of the Board of Public Works. So the dual role is really to give the Mayor's Office the opportunity to serve as a liaison for the film industry and to work with all of the key city departments that work with the industry the most. Recreation and Parks, the Department of Transportation, the Fire Department, the Police Department, much of it around filming and film permitting in the city of Los Angeles. But a lot of it also has to do with coordinating neighborhoods and working with the various council offices. We have a terrific panel. I do want to spend, I'm going to give a brief introduction of each of the panelists, and then before we start with my questions, I really would like for each of them to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what they do, providing an example maybe of what their average day, if such a thing exists, is like in their career, to give you a sense of who we have joining us this afternoon. I will start to my left. Sandy Kleiman is, and by the way, few people in the entertainment industry have a resume as significant and diverse as Sandy's. He is the CEO and representative board director of Alumni Entertainment Works. It is a global entertainment studio with offices in Tokyo and, of course, Los Angeles. It adapts, co-develops, and produces the best creative properties and brands from Japan into English language, global entertainment, in partnerships with established Hollywood studios and world-class filmmakers. Mr. Kleiman is also the founder of Entertainment Media Ventures, a company that's active in media investment and strategic advisory work with a particular focus on innovative technologies pushing forward the boundaries of media and entertainment. And Sandy will talk a bit in a moment about more of what he does. Sitting next to him, we have Kim Roberts-Hedgepeth. She is currently the executive director of the Film Musicians Secondary Markets Fund. That's a 501c6 nonprofit. It collects and distributes residual payments from films and television programs released in the supplemental markets defined by the American Federation of Musicians Union contracts. The fund also serves as a resource for the motion picture music community in addressing the challenges facing the industry. During the past 5 years, collections by the fund averaged over $86 million annually. And from 2005 to 2012, Kim led the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, AFTRA, as its national executive director. She was my national executive director for some time and was the first African American to serve as the chief executive staff person of a major entertainment industry union. And sitting next to Kim, to her left, is Amy Lemish. Amy is the executive director of the California Film Commission. And as the executive director of the California Film Commission, of course, Amy oversees all of the state's efforts to facilitate motion picture, television, and commercial production. She was appointed by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in May of 2004, continues obviously to serve Governor Brown. Under her leadership, the commission coordinates with all levels of state and local government to promote California as a production locale. And Amy's somebody that we work with just about daily on the city level regarding the implementation of the new film and television tax credit. I do think it's important to note that Amy spent years as a producer for the Penny Marshall Company. Some of her credits include some of our favorites, of course. The Preacher's Wife, Riding in Cars with Boys, Renaissance Man, A League of Their Own, and the list goes on. To Amy's left, we have Joe Byron, the Director of Student and Alumni Engagement at the Los Angeles Film School. Joe has over 40 years experience working in the entertainment industry across a variety of positions, from an engineer and company executive to a teacher and administrator. He also has experience in production, including camera, art, and special effects for commercials, film, and television. Joe has spent the past 17 years at the Los Angeles Film School, filling a variety of positions across his of positions across his tenure at the school, including technical director, associate dean, and director of education. He's been a film program director, director of students, and currently the director of student and alumni engagement. And to Joe's left is Juan Camacho, who's the vice president of the Fox Entertainment Group. Juan is the vice president for state and local government affairs, and Fox, of course, is one of the largest media companies in the world. In his capacity here in Hollywood, let's start the board. Amy,
it truly is global movies of the week, or made-for-television movies. That was like, there were many more of those, but the licensing fees were tightening up, so producers were looking for ways to stretch their dollars, and they went to Canada to capitalize on those credits, so it made it cheaper for them to shoot there, and they left. So I'd say by 2000, 2001, all of the made-for-television movies had pretty much left California, for the most part. And then it just kept growing and snowballing after that. I think in 2003, Louisiana came on board, and then it grew to the point where now we have about 40 states that are offering an incentive program, some type of rebate, tax credit, refund, some form of that. And then also, as I said, global on the international stage. The UK has a huge program, Ireland, Germany, France, Hungary, Australia, so it's global. So for us, what it's done is we still maintain sort of our critical mass of infrastructure, and as I always talk about, we have the best crews and the most plentiful crews, and talent in front of and behind the camera, availability of every type of piece of equipment you might need, and the facilities and all of that, but it doesn't mean we're the only place that offers that now. And that's where the incentives come into play, because producers aren't just looking for that expertise that we have, they're looking for how far they can stretch their dollars.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy. To talk a little bit about yourself, what you're doing right now. Kind of a little bit about the long career that you've had.
When you talk about a long and diverse career, it basically means you couldn't hold a job.
Au contraire, my friend.
I mean, the trick is to stay around long enough. But to me, when you talk about a typical day, there is no typical day. I have a son who actually went to USC Film School and just graduated, and he's now doing real estate on the east side of the city. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, well, I kind of looked at your life. And he says, I'm not sure I want that life. He says, you seem to be on 24/7. And he says, I think I may want to control my time, and maybe I'll dabble after I make a fortune in real estate, I'll do something in film. And I said, a much better idea. But the interesting part about where we are, my company, All Nippon Entertainment Works, and the other wacky stuff I've done, but All Nippon Entertainment Works, I think, is a testament to the globalization of the business. And there are stories from everywhere in the world. So Japan, the film industry, if you go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, obviously we have the Edison and the growth of the business in America, but Europe grew at the same time, whether it was England or France, Italy. Japan has as long a film history, as long an entertainment history, and as diverse an entertainment history as anywhere else in the world. The cameras somehow, even with geographic distance, became tools for art and communications at the same time. And the difference between Japan and most other countries is that over time the Japanese film industry is so large, and the population is large enough to support an insular industry, so that you can actually never leave Japan with intellectual properties and do just fine, whether you're Toho or Soshoku or any of the television networks, and it's just a wonderful place. But you have language, cultural barriers, and I think what we're seeing, and Japan is a good example, but by no means the only example, is that you should look for stories everywhere. And what our company does, which is a wonderful gift in collaboration with one of the financing arms that's associated with the Japanese government, is we basically are a Japanese company. We have a native-speaking, a Japanese culturally centric office in Tokyo, and it breaks down the language barriers, the cultural barriers of doing business. it looks for, instead of just the handful of things that bubble up and may show up in Variety or Deadline or The Hollywood Reporter or somewhere that would bring it to attention here, they can actually dig far deeper and look for that which should translate. Now, from a general point of view in my life, I think if we don't build bridges by telling stories cross-culturally, no matter what part of the world it's from, the way you level the playing field in terms of what I always thought I came to the entertainment industry to do, which is that it's not just entertainment, it's emotion, it's understanding, it's history, it's all of the things that should drive you other than making money. Making money, the business part of it's important. Passion and the desire to bring forward, thoughts that should be shared, not just here, but around the world. The only way we're actually going to, get to a place that's a better place than I think we are is for people, instead of seeing each other in sound bites, which has been accentuated by digital media and really the internet, is to tell stories that humanize people from all over the world, to understand that the stories that are told all over the world, one, should be seen in their native languages, understood and appreciated, and two, in many instances can be adapted and then brought not just to the English language world, but to cultures that find the centrality of the human condition and embrace it and adapt and then draw dialogue, discussion, and community around the sharing of stories.
And Kim, what does your life like in representing the musicians in the industry? I asked you on the way in, is how are things going? It seemed to indicate that at least a part of it is going well.
Part of it's going well. Can you hear me? Part of it's going well, and boy, trying to follow that was so deep and moving.
You can lighten it up.
Okay, I'll try and lighten it up. As Kevin explained, the Film Musicians Secondary Markets Fund is a separate nonprofit that collects and processes what's called the secondary market residuals for the musicians who work in film and television, and now increasingly in what's called colloquially new media, although frankly it's been around long enough we should stop calling it new media. And what we do on any given day, we are separate from the American Federation of Musicians, which is the union that represents the professional musicians, but we handle all of the residuals for those musicians that come from those aftermarket sources. So on any given day, we are working with producers to work with them to make sure that the residuals they're paying in comport with what's in the collective bargaining agreement. On any given day, I might be talking to music contractors or folks in the music from companies to help them understand how the residual structures work so they can factor that in as part of their budgeting. Certainly, even though we are separate from the union, we do often find ourselves helping to facilitate conversations between the union and producers, particularly newer producers who aren't as familiar with working with the guild or union contracts. And on a day-to-day basis, a large part of what we do is work with the individual musicians to make sure that they're being properly credited for the residuals that they're due. But one of the key things that is part of our internal work is because we're the ones who are processing the residuals for the secondary markets from television, film, motion picture film, and new media, to the extent we're seeing that still, we have somewhat of an insight as to what's happening on what I'll call the back end. And what we have consistently been seeing, setting aside the couple of years that there was a labor stoppage, which was 2007, 2008, and we had, of course, the recession, which hit us in 2008 and affected consumer purchasing. What we have been seeing since then is a really big expansion in the growth of the residuals that we collect. Kevin mentioned that it was $86 million on average in the last 5 years. Actually, we just closed our books for this fiscal year, and we've now broken another record at $93.4 million. But what we collect is less than 1%, far less than 1% of the distributor's gross, and it's only of the gross receipts, and it's only of the slice that the American Federation of Musicians represents. So it's a sample, but it gives you a sense of how big this aftermarket is growing. And the key part of what we're noticing when it comes to digital media is that not only is the back-end pie growing, but the share of that pie that is coming from new media has just explosively grown over the last 5 years. And so the future that we're seeing for people who work in film, television, and content made for digital platforms, and the people who have to monetize that content, is really the traditional media as we've known it is going to be less and less a factor, and the new digital platforms are really going to overtake where the monetization is over time. It's not quite there yet, it's still in its nascent stages, but I think as you project out over a generation, it's going to completely shift from what we've been used to.
Thanks, Kim. And Joe, approaching 20 years at the Los Angeles Film School with the growth in technology and no longer new media. What have you seen happen? How does that affect what you do every day at the Los Angeles Film School?
Well, a funny thing has happened to Hollywood in the last 20 years. How many of you drive up and down Sunset Boulevard very much? From Western to La Brea, it's a different place than it used to be. There are high-rises going up, there are restaurants, there are people walking down the streets. It's a city that's alive, it's a city that's fun. A lot of people are coming to Hollywood now, and they're staying in Hollywood. I mean, I'm talking about tourists. They're staying in hotels in Hollywood as opposed to just coming in for the day. I've had the unique and wonderful opportunity of watching this happen through the window of my office at 6363 Sunset Boulevard. And what I have seen was an idea that we had with the LA Film School back in 1999, which was to create kind of a boutique educational system where we could train people to take entry-level positions in the film industry, because there wasn't many avenues for people to get those basic skills except through traditional education, which could take 2 or 4 or 6 years. Our philosophy mushroomed and grew and then eventually changed. Our first class back in September '99 was 13 students, 3 of which were international. After about a year and a half, we had 200 students. We currently have 200 faculty members and 2,000 students on campus at any one time. Part of this, I think, has helped to feed the growth and the economy of the superstructure and infrastructure of Hollywood. The fact that merchants now have people to sell food to, and building owners have people that stay there and live there and run their lives there. But we've also contributed to the infrastructure of the industry. Amy mentioned that that's what's strong about Hollywood, the fact that we have the services, the fact that we have the expertise, and we have the human resource. That's something that's happening in Hollywood education, as we speak. And as proud and as happy as I am to be part of the Los Angeles Film School, it's not just us. You can now see Emerson College that's put a major facility on Sunset. Musicians Institute is growing, and they're expanding their programs. There are now programs that teach you how to be a DJ and teach you how to use, we don't call it new media, we're actually promoting something which is called transmedia. And transmedia is something that has to do with having a concept. And the concept has many different ways that it can be used in terms of different venues and in terms of different types of content. There's merchandising and there's music and there are video games. We went from being a simple entry-level program that taught cinematography and editing. We're now teaching business education, how to become an entrepreneur, how to sell yourself in the industry, how to stay in the industry. We are seeing more and more women becoming involved in the industry, and we think that's a wonderful thing. And the education gives them a chance to show and prove that they have the skills and they have everything that's needed, just like what was once a very much male-dominated industry. We're attracting international students, which help to increase make much integrated culture in terms of the stories that are told. We have found that there are also international students coming from either Europe or South America or Asia that want to come in and learn and then take what they've learned back to build up the industries in their countries. But we find they kind of rubber band back. They come here, they want to stay, and they come back for refreshers, and they're always referring back to Hollywood. I think that Hollywood education is amazing and it's important. And we have 3 sister schools. One is in Orlando, one is in Brazil, one is in Denver, but nobody that's interested in studying the entertainment industry that lives west of the Mississippi River is interested in going anywhere but in Hollywood.
Thank you. Juan, you have a very important role right here in Hollywood for one of the largest media companies in the world. So from where you sit, talk a bit about what you see from the industry in the time that you've been there, and the parts of the industry that you work with.
Okay. Well, I think the most interesting thing to talk about for us is California and the tax incentive, and maybe the tax incentives domestically, internationally, as Amy mentioned earlier, just the amount of competition that California faces in trying to retain or attract production to either stay or come back to California. When I started at Fox, California was still in the middle of the recession. It was still in the middle of its very dire budget situation, something like $14 billion deficit. And at the time, the industry had gone for several years to the legislature asking them to do something in a tax incentive way to try to give California some kind of footing to try to retain production. And it took several years before we were able to make that happen. It finally happened in 2009, and it was a very modest program. $100 million a year for 5 years was the way it initially started. We ended up being able to get extensions of the program of 2 years and a year. But frankly, $100 million a year was not enough money to retain production. And as a studio, my executives would say, one, talk to these legislators, let them know if all things being equal, we would rather stay in California, but they have to get a competitive tax incentive. It has to be something more than $100 million that'll help retain some of the tentpole movies, which are our movies that cost over $100 million, $200 million, or it has to include television series, because at the time, TV series were not even a part of the program. That didn't happen until 2 years ago, or last year, really, when the new program came into effect in July of last year. So, obviously, as the state's budget situation got better, we were able to build the case for why California needed to pass an incentive that was going to help retain a lot of this production. Some of the changes that we did was, we included 1-hour drama into the program, which was leaving the state for locations like Louisiana, Georgia. Georgia has a huge industry. Georgia attracted so much production that Pinewood Studios came in and built infrastructure. They built stages outside of Atlanta because the Georgia tax incentive was doing so well. They spent a couple $2 billion to create the infrastructure to continue to attract production out of California. And frankly, I think, the success of the program as it is, I think that when we go back to the legislature in a year or two and we try to discuss whether this program has been successful, from the perspective of Fox, I think that we're going to be able to tell a couple of really great stories, right? It's American Horror Story was in Louisiana, and as a result of the tax incentive, we were able to bring that back. We were able to bring Scream Queens is going to come back in a couple of months when we begin our new filming. That was also filming in Louisiana. Rosewood filmed the pilot in Florida. We brought that back into California. But all of those successes were only because the tax incentive grew. It tripled to $330, and we were able to include network TV as part of it. On the other side of that, your feature films, one of the complaints I would get from my feature guys was, well, there's $100 million, but TV's taking all of it under the old program, because as programs got selected to get into the program, if they were renewed, they were grandfathered into the new program, which means that at the end of the day, that $100 million, when it came time to renew the new process, there was maybe $5, $10, $15 million left, which really wasn't enough money for anybody to even try to put in an application in. So the fact that we were able to, that the legislature created separate buckets for separate programs, so feature films were competing against feature films for money, network TV is competing against network TV for feature money, relocating series are competing against each other for a piece of the pie. Now we had 2 different projects on our film side that we're able to get into the program, one of which just finished wrapping, actually. We just wrapped Why Him with Bryan Cranston and James Franco. It's one of the first feature films we've had on the lot. And, I want to say, since I started in 2009, I remember we filmed Water for Elephants with Reese Witherspoon and Rob Pattinson. They did the whole parade scene. That was the first time in a long time, and this Why Him was the second time since I've been at Fox for about 6 years that we've actually had a feature film on the lot, which is unheard of. So I know from the perspective, my executives are really happy to see that California has planted a flag, so to speak, here, to try to keep production, try to keep the jobs, and at the end of the day, continue to make this the entertainment capital of the world. The one thing I will say, though, is that at no point did Hollywood ever have 100% of all production. So the goal, going forward, productions will aren't always going to be in California, but at least now California is part of the conversation. Something that my executives would always say to us: we don't even consider California. It's just we don't even think about it. We go to Georgia, we go to Australia, we do numbers for New York, Louisiana. California isn't even considered. Now, it not only is it considered, but my executives are saying, how can we get the legislature to give us more money, because this program is a success. How can we tell that story?
Well, and it's something that obviously the mayor loves talking about, as creating the entertainment capital of the world once again here in Hollywood, which is a part of the city of Los Angeles. Sandy, from where you sit, I mean, we have the obvious advantages of every studio having its headquarters either in the city of Los Angeles or essentially bordering the city of Los Angeles. Every television network, if they don't have the headquarters here, they have a headquarters here. But you've seen the industry from a much broader perspective. What advantage, what are some of our challenges that you see still? But what are some of the other advantages that you've recognized about Hollywood, even as web-based content has grown?
Well, the advantages of Hollywood are fascinating. I mean, firstly, there's great weather, so we should all enjoy it. I apologize for the sun coming in your direction.
I'm getting a sunburn.
I'm saying the front row is putting on dark glasses. But, people came here at a time where it was basically a desert, and it was a place you could actually create. It was a place it was like America. It was immigrants came from all over. And what you had, and again, why things happen the way they happen and why they continue the way they continue, sometimes a mystery. So you ended up with, even though the headquarters at the turn of the century of Lowe's Corporation were New York, the studios were here. And what you ended up with, it was kind of the Wild West of creativity, and I think to some degree we still have that. You have a critical mass where, whether it's on Sunset Boulevard and you see the growth there, or any part of the city, people from all over the world flocked here. Sometimes they came here because it was the place that there was financing, there were outdoor locations that could double for almost anywhere in the world, and frankly, you go back far enough in movies and you see, wonderful European settings that are basically shot on the Warner Ranch. Sometimes it was World War II and people were fleeing the war, and the directors and the actors came here and they stayed. And I think that sort of critical mass of creativity, the sort of freeness, the sort of entrepreneurial American spirit, whether it's entrepreneurial or creative, there's great similarities between those, which is why I think we're seeing more entrepreneurship and we're seeing that sort of migration. And I think the testament to that right now is, even though Seattle, Bay Area, San Jose may be the homes for the next generation of digital media companies, their studios are here. And I think the sense of, I do know friends who actually live in the San Juan Islands and sit in a dark room and write, or maybe a light room and write, and send the scripts in. But the reality is bumping into other creative people, sitting around that sort of crazy milieu that actually, sparks the creative energy. There are very few places in the world that do it, and there are none that do it as well as the greater Los Angeles area, which spans Playa Vista to the eastern region of the city, frankly, where there was, original studios as well. I think that the challenge coming up, and it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity set, is that there are always other great locuses of creativity. I think that technology, whether it's the internet or mobile or just the transfer of film elements that are now digital elements, is going to allow the sense that there is a massive hub here. But I think over time, much as we train people and they go back, whether it's to China, to the Middle East, to India, India has its own amazing industry, but the sense of creating global entertainment, I think we will continue to be, one of probably the central point of it, but we will also be one of many points of creativity that are linked around the world.
And Kim, so we've talked a bit about the new film and television tax credit that Amy's office is overseeing and the growth for the state that has meant. Has that growth, has it made its way to the people in the industry that you represent, the musicians in film? Is there a part of it?
Not all the way through. And I think that's kind of the next step. The significant improvements that have occurred in this town since the new tax credit went into effect have been just phenomenal. I used to be working at one of the unions in this town, and the way things were back in 2008, 2009, 2010, before the new tax credit came into effect, the impact on employment, the suppression of wages, frankly, because of the loss of work here in Hollywood, was a significant issue, and there really was a sense of skittishness and insecurity, particularly for the actors that I represented, whether or not they could continue to sustain a career and a living in this town. With the expansion of the tax credit, even though I no longer work with one of the unions, I certainly have enough former colleagues who are talking about how their rosters are full. The crafts have now had record employment that they have not had before. We've seen that with the actors as well. Some of the challenges we still have and we still have to address are on the post-production side, particularly on the music side. We have not yet seen the collateral benefit of the growth in production here in California for the music community. There are certain, at least for the professional music community, there are certainly, with the creative juices that do exist in this town, opportunities for people to hone their craft. However, getting the opportunities for the music to be scored here in Los Angeles, while there's been a slight uptick, we have not yet seen the level of growth that we've seen in other crafts and in the production sector. And we hope that as the incentive is looked at in future years, and hopefully as collateral benefits begin to grow, we'll see a little bit more of what we're seeing now in the production side flow through into the post-production communities in the town.
And Amy, how do you gauge the advantage of the existing original infrastructure of the Hollywood studio existence here? In other words, one of the thoughts that we would say in the political world is, look, we don't necessarily have to meet New York, for example, because of the infrastructure that we have in place. As long as we are on the playing field, we have other advantages from crews being available, people not having to travel. Are you seeing that in now entering year 2 of the implementation of the higher film and television tax credit?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm seeing it from the 7 previous years of the old program, too.
Okay.
So-
Even better.
But can I just digress for a minute before
Oh,
I
sure.
answer your question? So I want to piggyback on Juan, and I want to piggyback on
Yeah,
Kim.
all yours.
Just a clarification, so the old program that started in 2009 did include television, but it was restricted to this little sector of basic cable. 1 hour scripted for basic cable. And what I think is appropriate for this discussion today is that what the expansion did was, forget about how it's distributed, it's targeting the 1 hour scripted programming because that's the more high impact, frankly, big spenders in the land of TV, right? They have very high production values and thus high budgets and big economic footprint. So that was what we were targeting. But network, basic cable, direct to internet, Amazon, Netflix, look at the kind of budgets they're spending. So what the new program did was it said it doesn't matter how the content is distributed, we want the business. So that was part of the expansion that I think is key for everybody to understand. And then with regard to post-production and scoring as well, it's true, the effect, so we have 1 year kind of under our belt, but the effect of that on post-production, it's difficult to gauge yet because really TV does a much quicker, more down and dirty post-production piece. To the extent that they do any scoring, it's very small groups of musicians, not a huge orchestral. I don't think you do in television, big orchestral scores on television, and same with visual effects. Yeah, they'll do it, but everything's scaled down and smaller. For television, features have such a long lead time. We're not really seeing the effects of the features that have gotten into the program yet in terms of how that affects the whole post-production pipeline. So next year we'll be able to better answer that question.
Okay.
But then back to your question. Sorry about that. I think what you're getting at is so our program was specifically designed to be more modest than every other tax credit program in the country, probably in the world. I can't speak for every single program across the globe, but certainly in the US and Canada, ours is more modest. And it was designed that way because we don't have to offer what everybody else is offering. There are cost savings, believe it or not, in staying here because of the availability of everything and the immediacy and also casting too plays a huge part of that too, that productions will choose to be here because they can get a much better cast if they choose to stay here. Availability of everything. So yes, we offer less than our out-of-state competitors, but when you do an apples-to-apples budget comparison, we're equal. You follow?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And Joe, for students that are leaving the Los Angeles Film School, they're graduating, heading into the industry, what are you, a lot of alumni obviously, what do you hear back? What aspects of the industry are they working in? Is it balancing out with traditional studio type production jobs, agency jobs versus web-based content and new media? How's that balance now?
Well, it's definitely changed from the original concept to being the boutique teaching cinematography, art direction, et cetera, et cetera. We've had to, alter and sophisticate the curriculum in such a way that the students, as they became graduates, would become more entrepreneurial. We can teach them how to use software and we can teach them basic skills, but what we have to teach them is how to continue to learn, how to develop, how to brand themselves, and then how to put themselves in what is an entirely different type of market. And we've really risen to that challenge. I like to call it, instead of a technology, I like to call it process. What is expected from you in the industry, and we've expanded our process education to include programs in entertainment business, where they learn how to pitch, they learn how to do business plans, they learn how to deal with taxes, they learn about intellectual property. They learn about, how to recruit and how to manage businesses. And this has been incredibly successful. Part of my position that I've been doing over the last year or two has been polling and keeping track and finding out what our 10,000 plus alumni are up to. Most of them are still in the LA Hollywood area. Most of them are working in the industry. Some of them have gone into traditional jobs. They come out, they wanted to be a cinematographer, they interned somewhere, and now they're Steadicam operators, and they're making a good living. Others have taken a different turn. You know, they take and put their little 3-minute bits on YouTube or on Vimeo and put them out there and get 900 hits, but one of those hits might be a developer from Comedy Central, and this really happened. We had one of our students approached by a developer from Comedy Central and said, "I really like your 3-minute bit, here's $50,000 to make a sizzle reel." He was so excited. I mean, you can imagine someone that's just come out of high school, been through an 18-month program and is in his early 20s, and someone's offering him $50,000. Well, that was the most money he could ever imagine getting. He did manage to make an entire pilot, which was purchased. It became the show Workaholics. It's now in its 7th year, and they've done 86 episodes. And pretty much the entire crew was made up of Los Angeles Film School and other people that were associated with him as he went along. We had a couple of other graduates who did the same thing. They put things up in the internet, on new media, got picked up by Funny or Die, went from Funny or Die to HBO, and they became writers for Saturday Night Live, the holy grail of writing, television writing. But they're back in Hollywood now, directing television shows here. So by learning to use the new tools that exist in terms of showing and pitching their products and their content, they have been able to kind of leapfrog the traditional 5, 10, 12, 15 years it takes to become established in the industry, and they're joining the DGA and the WGA 1 or 2 years out of school. It's very exciting, and it's also very exciting because they are employing and they are using local resources, local actors, local friends, and keeping it here. And it amazes me in my research to find these circles within circles within circles of people that are working together and creating content for all the new venues that are out. It's very, very exciting.
One, just a couple of things that I'd like for you to cover. One, does it, and maybe they loop together, maybe not, but does it bother the studios that you are the traditional sense of media now, and maybe College Humor is the web-based content, is something that people look at with a little bit of a younger flair, perhaps? And secondly, and are you all what is the studio doing to move into that market to the extent they may already be there? And the other question relates more to the tax credit issue. We talked earlier about the advantages that Hollywood has with the existing infrastructure here. Has the studios and the people that work with you at Fox, are they constantly reviewing other states' attempts at building an existing infrastructure? Albuquerque, Atlanta, places like that, that have tried to maintain an infrastructure only to perhaps, like North Carolina, see the rug pulled out from under them with the reduction of a tax credit.
So, I think, just to start off on the first questions, I wouldn't say that it bothers the studios. I think that there's always this misconception that because that the studios are stodgy, that they're not moving quick enough to capture some of the trends that are happening with the consumers, right? So whether it's from the perspective of Fox, and I'll speak obviously for Fox because I can't speak for these studios, but giving the consumer the opportunity to access any and all of our content is tantamount, right? We want eyeballs to be watching our products. So whether it's being a third owner of Hulu, right, giving people an opportunity to see our content through different avenues that isn't just sitting in your living room on the TV, being able to stream it online, partnering with some of these digital companies like Netflix, we were one of the first original content producers partnered with them. We brought back Arrested Development for a 4th season for something like 10 or 12 episodes. So it's partnerships of some of our content with a lot of these digital folks. Or whether, it's our or our apps, right? It's Fox app, being able to go onto the Fox network app and catching any of the sitcoms or dramas that you can see on television, but if you don't have time for it, we're making it easy and accessible for anybody, any age, to be able to see our content. So I think that this idea that we're being left behind or that we're not catching up with the consumer, I think that that's a misrepresentation. I think that that's just the way some of the media might like to cover it, because you hear a lot of times, people binge watching something like House of Cards, and then they say, whoa, somebody actually binge watched. What are they doing television's dying. It's a dying breed. But then you stack that up against a show like Empire, who season after season or week after week, the first season continued to add viewers, right? It's the first show in as many years to attract new viewers every single week. It's about providing compelling television that people want to watch, and I think that that's where Hollywood is headed, right? That's why you see this growth in production. One of the things that we always talk about as it relates to the tax incentive, when we talk to legislators a lot, was, the problem isn't that California isn't retaining production, because it is. It's that it's not retaining its piece of production, because nowadays everything from HBO to Showtime, where Homeland is a 20th Century Fox Television production, something like Homeland, which airs on Showtime, or again, Arrested Development, which is on Hulu. Those avenues didn't exist before, so that's an increase in production that the industry, a spike in production that the industry has gone through. But a lot of those jobs were leaving, so instead of helping retain or keep that production, they were finding other states to go to because of the tax incentive. So, from our perspective, we're doing everything we can to keep ahead of the curve, making sure that the consumers feel that they can access us on their phone, on their TV, through Roku, through Apple TV. I mean, giving people countless ways to be able to access our content. And as to the question about infrastructure in other states, I think one of the things that we always settle, when we have conversations with our physical productions executives, is this idea that at some point it'll settle. Some of this incentive talk will settle out between some of these other states. North Carolina being a good example of a state that had attracted a good amount of production. We actually were filming Homeland there. We filmed Sleepy Hollow there before they stripped the tax incentive, and our folks were scrambling. We were left to figure out, do we stay in North Carolina, do we leave? Ultimately, both of those productions left, and North Carolina made a decision that they really didn't want to be in the game of Hollywood production. Now, the one thing that we say here, and we say to legislators, and everybody knows, is just how mobile our industry is. We can pick up and go. There's no tax incentive, great. We're going to move to Atlanta. If there's no stage space in Atlanta, we're going to find a warehouse. We're going to spend money to make it as close to a soundstage as possible, so that we can film in that soundstage and take advantage of the tax incentive. So I think that as far as what the other states are doing, you're seeing a little bit of settling. Florida's out of the game at the moment as well. But when I do take meetings with some of the film commissioners from other states, when they come to Los Angeles to try to lure production to their states, everybody points to California. Everybody that we talk to says, we've told our governor, we've told everybody, California's in the game now, which is something that beforehand, when we would meet with them, it was something they would never say. But the fact that other states are now seeing that California's taking this industry seriously, I think is a game changer that nobody saw coming, because nobody really thought, after 5 years of the same thing over and over, 100 million, everybody just assumed California was going to go business as usual. But when the governor and the legislators and the industry as a whole, as a coalition, right? It was one of the few coalitions where labor and business were hand in hand, talking to legislators, saying, hey guys, this is important for Hollywood, this is important for California. It was a huge game changer. So as others, so for infrastructure, Georgia, again, Georgia will continue, I think, to be a bright spot. I think that you'll see New York continue to be a bright spot. Louisiana's faltering a little bit because they have budget issues. Vancouver's great, but the program is full. There's just so many. Vancouver's great, but there's only so many crew depth there that it forces studios like ours to reconsider whether going there. And again, California now is part of the conversation. So if we can, we choose to stay.
There was, you mentioned the coalition. There was a letter signed by the 10 mayors of the 10 largest cities across the state of California. Obviously, of course, Los Angeles being the largest that was instrumental in working with the coalition. Sandy, what may be our final question in the time that we have, you've heard obviously a lot of talk about what we're doing here in Hollywood and California, but looking at the global market and the way that you do and experience that you have, what do you see as the future? What would be our prognosis? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that Hollywood as an industry here in Southern California faces?
Well, it's opportunities. I mean, when I started in the business, if you wanted to get somebody to pay attention to your creativity and you were not well known, you had to go borrow a camera you couldn't afford, find film ends that you couldn't buy, edit in a borrowed room, and then find a screening room, somehow bribe the projectionist and invite a bunch of agents or studio executives who might or might not show up. Right now, you can basically take your phone or a fairly inexpensive but professional grade video camera. You can edit on your computer, and you can basically get anybody to look at anything in a link, and you can put it up yourself no matter what. So the world is shrinking. I mean, I think the opportunity set is that ultimately over-the-top television, OTT, which is a term that's an historic term at this point, but it's just internet television, is going to change everything. I mean, it doesn't change overnight. The forms of distribution aren't going to go away. It could take decades for the degradation of the advertising industry and the over-the-air channels, if that's even a term that's going to be relevant, cord cutting, all of that. But what will happen is that we're in a period of transition now, and we will be for a while, that it has its problems now, but it has its opportunities later. As an example, if you went to get a drama made at a studio, and there are always counterexamples, it's very hard, because frankly, nobody wants to put a drama in a theater, because people would just as soon watch it at home. So the exhibition business is going to go through a radical transformation, but on the other hand, if you want to reach an audience that wants to see a drama, you're going to find very willing audiences that are going to be willing to pay for good entertainment. The thing that I've seen most over my career is that we used to make miserable stuff and then package it with really good stuff and jam it down the throats of people, no matter in the music industry too. Hence an album. You got 3 tracks, you got 6 you don't want, you still got to buy the album, and somehow that disappeared. And I think that you used to walk in a video store, and when the early days of rental, it was like, oh yeah, these B movies, but the top 10 movies are all gone, so what else am I going to watch? And nowadays what you have is, that transition to which is going to be benefited by many things. One is that you're going to be able to have available to you that which suits you, and it can find an audience that otherwise might not be findable, because some of those people may not leave their home, some of them may not be able to find the time and travel. We're going to make it easy. 2 is we're in a world where the entertainment industry, which is basically just one to many, and let's guess what people want to see, and then maybe if we run a 9 p.m. roadblock on every network, we can convince them that they should go opening weekend. Those days are transitioning to, we have predictive analytics, we have a database, we are going to know who our customers are, we're going to be in a dialogue with them, and we're going to sell them entertainment that isn't made by them, but frankly is a virtuous cycle of a relationship with a customer, which is something that the entertainment industry has never really understood and is just beginning to understand. And the final overlay on that is that geographic boundaries fall away. And that's great for creativity. It's great for the economy. The thing that is, I think, not going to change in Hollywood is that people need to create in groups. You can write alone, and that's true, but at the end of the day, the difference between visual media and writing a book, novel, is that it's not a solitary profession. Television itself is written by groups of writers in collaboration in a writer's room. They break down stories. We live in a world of creative collaboration, and where we are headed right now is for the opportunities for collaboration to be greater than they've ever been.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to Amy Lemish, Kim Roberts, Hedgepath, Juan Camacho, Sandy Kleiman, and Joe Byron. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.